It sounds like the best move the Eagles have made all season is hiring Jim Schwartz because, while he's not a dominating player that many thought he would be, he'd be a very good rotational fit in that 4-3 with two pretty good players already with Cox and Logan.
Yeah, and obviously the Eagles lack depth at that position. So as good as they are with the starters, that's as bad as they are with the backups. And in today's NFL, with the pace you have, it's going to be slowed down a bit, obviously, now that Chip Kelly's out of town. But still, the league as a whole has gone to more spread offense and just the tempo of certain teams. You need the good teams have a really good rotation on the defensive front, and it's usually 7 or 8 deep. And right now the Eagles don't have anything at defensive tackle behind the two starters. So I think a lot of people are looking at what the Eagles have done, putting two and two together, and this is another guy who Jim Schwartz has had some success with. But while I say that, it's also a bigger name. So it remains to be seen. We're in the second phase of free agency, so that's a good sign because nobody jumped it fairly, who's been mainly an underachiever, as you pointed out, I think it was a number 12 overall pick, but hasn't lived up to that status, but he still has some upside as a player. And if the Eagles can fit him into the budget, they'd love to have him.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on that. I agree with you. I think he was the 13th pick and hasn't been the star that many people thought he would be coming out of Auburn. But, again, like many of these guys, John, he was a guy who played well for Schwartz. And, it seems like he has had the magical touch. He must be a guy these guys like playing for. Yeah,
he is. I've yet to hear a bad word about him. Everyone likes him. Everyone respects him. Everybody has a ton of respect for him as a defensive coordinator. I should say I've never heard a bad word about him as a defensive coordinator. Has heard some bad words as a head coach. But as far as handling a defense, he's one of the best in the business, and it's going to be a huge upgrade for the Eagles this season. There's no question about that.
Yeah, we'll keep our eye on what Philadelphia does. Let me, there's a lot of NFL things going on before we jump into some Eagles stuff. But Ravens today, they're going to sign Chargers safety Eric Weddle, 4-year, $26 million. He gets $13 million over the first 2 years. So Weddle, finally gets out of that San Diego situation.
Yeah, I had a lot of issues with the organization, obviously, and this is a Pro Bowl level safety. Unfortunately, his free agency post-30 this time, so that's what kind of held down his number a bit and what took it a little bit longer because we know what teams think about in this league, and they want, by and large, to give big money to the players coming off their rookie deals who they think are still ascending. But it's so big for Baltimore because they've really struggled at that position. You can really go back to Ed Reed. Before they've had a top-tier guy like this. So I think Baltimore's going to be one of those teams primed for a bounce-back year because obviously they have a great reputation around this league. It starts with Ozzie and Harbaugh, but they had so many injuries last season. At one point, they had over 20 guys on IR. How devastated they were injury-wise. You're going to have Joe Flacco back from the torn ACL. That's a team to watch out for that's going to be right back in the playoff mix.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Today's pigskin.com as we look at some of the national news. B.J. Raji says he's taking a 1-year hiatus. I saw you tweet earlier, John, though, that you think at 30 years old he's probably done.
Yeah, and let's be honest. One of the knocks about B.J. Raji over the years, he didn't keep himself in good enough shape to be the dominant player. Had really one big year, and then had been a disappointment for most of the others. And a lot of that was because he wasn't in shape. So if you think about a guy taking a year off because he can't get the money he wants and then coming back when the environment might be a little more desirous for him, I just don't think it's going to happen for a guy like this who's never shown any inkling of keeping himself in the football shape that the Packers wanted him to keep himself into.
We're talking with John, of course, and some other, this Martavius Bryant thing. He just kind of, this is amazing. I mean, he got a 1-year ban. There must have been something else going on here for him to take the 1-year ban because he got suspended 4 games entering this year for performance-enhancing drugs, correct?
Yeah, and the next step would have been 10 games under the new policy that they kind of hammered out for marijuana issues, and that's his significant problem. Problem is he missed a number of tests, not just one. So he refused to take tests, which is the same as failing a test, and they were multiple, so it counted as more, and now he's suspended for a full season. And remember, that's a minimum of a full season. He has to ask to be reinstated, and at that point, you have to go on from there. But we've seen with these guys time and time again who have significant addiction problems to marijuana, and I know some advocates like to point out that it's not addictive compared to other substances, but when you have somebody who's addicted, it doesn't matter. They can't stop, and it's tough for an NFL team to take a chance on him because from this point forward, he's got – it's not the same as the regular testing, which is twice a year. You could be tested at any time, and guys like this, it's proven time and time again, they're not going to be able to handle that load of passing tests again and again and again and again. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's a sad story because he checked into rehab. His agent said he's battling depression. The GM of the Steelers hinted that they want to try to hold on to him through the suspension here. But, I mean, he's a pretty talented player. I mean, he missed the first 4 games last year, and he still had an unbelievable season. You throw a guy who missed 4 games, scored 6 touchdowns, had almost 800 yards last year.
Yeah, he's tremendously talented. There's no question about that. It's devastating for the Steelers in a football sense. But we've seen it with Josh Gordon. We've seen it with Justin Blackmon, even more talented players. You can't count on them, and it's tough to put together a football team when you don't know the guy's going to be there. Forget about every Sunday, but you don't know if he's going to be there every year. And at some point, you got to cut bait from that perspective, simply because you can't have an employee who's not going to show up for work because he's not allowed.
John, where are we at with Kaepernick now? I mean, it seems like the Browns and him have cooled off. It seems as if the Broncos might have some interest there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's down to 3 teams, and it's Denver. I've always thought is the most likely scenario. Cleveland would be number 2, and the Jets sort of an outside chance at number 3. But I think the Jets are really trying to use people. They had RG3, for instance, late last week come in for a visit. They want to kind of strong-arm Ryan Fitzpatrick into coming back. That's their plan A. The Broncos, they don't want to give up a second-round pick for Colin Kaepernick. They'd rather – they say his value is a 4. They don't even have a 4th-round pick. So I could see them cobbling something together for a 3rd-round pick, and then he goes in there as the starter and Mark Sanchez as the backup. Cleveland, I think part of it is he likes Hugh Jackson, and Hugh Jackson likes Colin Kaepernick. They've always pined to work together. But he's seen what's going on in free agency, and the new Cleveland Browns regime, it seems like whoever is in control of that organization, it just doesn't work. And they've lost 2 really good offensive linemen. They've lost Tayshaun Gibson, who's a safety. They've lost Travis Benjamin, a pretty good wide receiver. Cleveland's just a bad situation. I think Colin Kaepernick is looking at it and saying, I don't know what I'm getting myself into if I go there.
All right, so that's one domino. What about Fitzpatrick? I mean, look, he might not be in teams' minds a $16, $17, $18 million quarterback, but you said it last week on the show. Bradford kind of set that pace. That's what starting quarterbacks get. That doesn't mean great players or elite players, starting quarterbacks. So when push comes to shove, is Fitzpatrick going to have to bend, or one of these teams going to bend?
Well, I think what you just expressed is what Ryan Fitzpatrick thinks, and he's probably right. If Sam Bradford gets $18 million, why isn't Ryan Fitzpatrick? If Brock Osweiler gets $18 million, why isn't Ryan Fitzpatrick? That's his mode of thinking. But as a 33-year-old guy that people around this league look at as a sort of a Band-Aid, not the ultimate answer, he just doesn't have the same market as those particular players, and it's tough to swallow if you're a guy like Ryan Fitzpatrick who's had more success than they have, and that's sort of the hurdle the Jets are trying to overcome. They want him back. They've certainly made that known, but they're not going to pay that kind of premium. And I think out there in the open market, he's seeing the value is just not there for him.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Today's Pigskin with all the national stuff from John. What about RG3? It sounds as if, as you mentioned, the Jets are kind of playing him a little bit, but there are some reports out there that the Rams aren't as interested as they seemed like as well.
Well, somebody's going to bring him in, but you're right. The interest hasn't been there. Certainly as a starter. I think eventually he'll settle somewhere as a backup for a modest number. That's where his value is right now, and there's been too much water under the bridge, not only as far as the injuries, but also the issues in the locker room with the Redskins and the fact that certain players didn't get along with them, so many reputation issues. So he'll get a chance, but it's going to have to shake out with the potential starters. We're going to have to see where Kaepernick goes. We're going to see where Fitzpatrick goes. Even Brian Hoyer, who eventually is going to either be released by the Houston Texans or preferably by them traded, maybe for a conditional seventh-round pick. Once those dominoes fall, I think you'll kind of see the market as a backup heat up for RG3.
Yeah, and there's some other interesting big names out there. Chris Long is with the Patriots. Russell Okung, he is going to New York is one of the places as well. The Steelers are one of the spots too. So those couple of guys are some of the bigger names that are still remaining on the free agent market. John, who are some of the other names of interest that still are out there? And there are some guys we'll get into that have signed over the weekend.
Well, when you talk about veterans, I think you're right with Okung because his situation is so interesting because he's acting as his own agent. So it's more than just a normal guy signing because people want to see how this works out. And if you can cut out the middleman and get an extra 3%, which is generally what NFL agents take from players, all of a sudden agents aren't going to be too happy. So they're not looking for Russell Okung to have success, but already he's got 3 offers. He's got an offer from the Giants, as you mentioned, the Steelers, and also the Detroit Lions. So I think it's going to work out pretty well for him. We'll see. He's coming off a pretty serious injury in the playoff game against Carolina, too, so that plays into it. And Fairley, the veteran guy, it's going to be interesting to see where that market is. And how much he can get, because a couple of years ago, we talked about the Detroit Lions and that defensive line with Ndamukong Suh and Nick Fairley in the middle. It looked like it was going to be one of the best in the NFL for a decade plus. All of a sudden, Suh's in Miami. Fairley's out of town. He's had a chance with St. Louis. He's never lived up to the billing. So he's another guy. And Eric Weddle was the big domino that fell today. So as far as veterans go, the market is really, really drying up pretty quickly.
John, I had this written down on my list at the top of the list. I kind of overlooked it, but the report over the weekend that the Patriots are bracing for Brady to lose the Deflategate appeal and possibly have to serve a 4-game suspension this year.
Yeah, it's possible, but I don't think it's likely. Not that he won't lose the appeal. That's a very good possibility, especially if you looked at the questions asked by the appellate court. You can kind of get the way of their thinking by the questions they asked. And they were much tougher on Brady's side than the NFL side. So that has everybody on the legal end of things projecting that Brady's going to lose. But they can appeal. And the NFLPA can appeal, and I expect them to. And if they get another stay, we're just in the same situation we were. Brady plays until the thing eventually exhausts itself, and they have 2 more appeal processes. It would go before 20 judges at the appellate court. Even if they lose that, then it goes to the Supreme Court. If they want to take it that far, and I don't see the NFLPA giving up on it.
Yeah. We talked about the quarterback spot, and you look at Fitzpatrick. In the end, is there a spot that makes the most sense for Fitzpatrick? Is going back to the Jets his best landing spot, or do you think that the Denver Broncos ultimately will look at the fact that they have Mark Sanchez as really the only quarterback on that roster and have to give in?
Well, the good thing for him is I think they're both great spots. If you look at the Jets, he had a career year. Brandon Marshall can't stop raving about him. He wants him back in the most desperate fashion. And the other situation, you're going to the reigning Super Bowl champions. Granted, they're not the same team. They've taken some significant hits in free agency already, but it still shapes up to be a pretty darn good team. So I think at the end of the day, he can't really pick wrong. His issue is the money and the fact that he can't come to grips that people like Sam Bradford and Brock Osweiler are going to make more money, but that's just where it is.
Yeah.
And I think he has to understand, if you look at it from a per-year basis, Brock Osweiler makes more than Tom Brady, but that's just the nature of timing and the way the NFL does business.
Yeah, no doubt. John, we got some draft stuff, too, on the way. We know the Eagles have moved up to number 8 in the draft. At this stage of the game, with what they've done in free agency, where do you think they now target at number 8?
Well, Howie Roseman's been pretty above board that he thinks every draft has tiers, and the Eagles think this draft drops off after number 10. So they think there's 10 good players, and that's why they were intent on making the flip with Miami and going from 13 to 8. They think of the worst-case scenario. Obviously, mathematically, they're going to get one of those 10 players. They can't not. But I keep hearing the name Miles Jack as a player the Eagles really, really like and would probably be at the top of the board. Now, while I say that, I don't think he's going to be there at number 8.
Does he fit?
Well, that's the thing. You have Bradham now, obviously, as they say, thanks. If you were able to get a Miles Jack, all of a sudden you say, thanks, Niles. Nigel, it was fun for a while, but you're not starting. This guy could be a tremendous all-pro, 3-down linebacker level player. So sort of when you're that high in the draft, it doesn't matter. You just pick the best player, let the chips fall where they may.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, another player I keep hearing that the Eagles love is Ronnie Stanley, the left tackle from Notre Dame. And obviously, when you look at them right now, tackle is not a huge need. Lane Johnson's re-signed. Jason Peters is going to be back. That's clear now. But if he's there, if he's the best player, you take him, you let the chips fall where they may, and that's what the Eagles are thinking right now.
Yeah, and by the way, the Eagles have that 8th pick in the draft. As we mentioned, as you mentioned, Stanley, Jack Conklin's a name that has been in a lot of mock drafts. Does he now kind of fall out of the mix because they went from 13 to 8? Is he a top 10 player?
No, I don't think he is, and that's part of it. I think he's in that second tier that Howie was talking about, and there's a significant drop-off in their perspective from 10 to 11. So a guy like that might have been a reach even at 13, I don't think he's even in the Eagles' conversation at this point, that they understand that there's a whole another group of players in the conversation. And as you mentioned, as far as fits, a guy like Hargraves would be a great fit. The defensive back from Florida State, Ramsey's not going to be there, so you understand that. Those guys are even fit the mix of being in that top tier of players and are fits. So that might be a best-case scenario. But I guarantee if Miles Jack somehow falls to 8, he's going to be the Eagles' pick.
Well, that would be interesting because, as you mentioned, they have Hicks, they've got Bradham, and they've got Kendricks. You would think those 3 guys would be the starters at those linebacker positions. The NFL draft time, always a fun time. NFL free agency kind of trailing off a little when news and notes happens. Of course, check out John at JF McMullen on Twitter. Go to 973ESPN.com in the must-read section for all of John McMullen's Eagles coverage. All right, man. I am heading out. I will talk to you in a week from now.
All right, buddy. Enjoy Clearwater.
I certainly will. I'll send you a postcard. Me and Sam Hinkie sipping on daiquiris together.
I knew that was going down. See?
All right, man. Take care.